All right, so we're back at the 1600 game, and I thought it would be good if we got one of our tutors on here to talk through some of the questions. We have Mia Richardson here. I met Mia a few years ago at the Highland Club in Boulder, where the Highland Institute think tank is. It's a fun place to hang out. And Mia was leaving, and I said, before you go, please, we're going to do something. Like, will you be ready when I'm ready? And you said yes, thankfully. And here we are. And so we're doing it. I want to talk about some of the questions that you think are interesting in the first practice test that kids see. So practice test 4 is misnamed. It's the first practice test everyone's going to see. So if someone's just getting started, they've probably seen some of these questions. And whatever questions you find interesting are definitely going to be interesting to the other students. As someone who is already finished school and is in law school at the University of Colorado, you're an expert reader and you know how to think through difficult language in a way that most of our high school students would dream of being able to think through language. So let's talk through some of these questions. I'll let you lead the way. You can tell us what you think is interesting. We'll take turns reading and we'll just kind of talk about the games of the test, some of the things that I want students to understand aside from just the substance of the test. So go ahead. What's the first one you want to look at?
Absolutely. So the first question that I flagged in looking at practice test 4 is question 5. And so I can go ahead and just read that for us now. So question 5 says, the following text is adapted from Susan Glaspell's 1912 short story, Out There. An elderly shop owner is looking at a picture that he recently acquired and hopes to sell.
Yeah, I'll read the next paragraph. We'll switch off. Okay, so here's the first paragraph. It did seem that the picture failed to fit with the rest of the shop. A persuasive young fellow who claimed he was closing out his stock let the old man have it for what he called a song. It was only a little out of the way store which subsisted chiefly on the framing of pictures. The old man looked around at his views of the city, his pictures of cats and dogs, his flaming bits of landscape. Don't belong in here, he fumed.
And yet, the old man was secretly proud of his acquisition. There was a hidden dignity in his scowling as he shuffled about, pondering the least ridiculous place for the picture.
Yeah, and we're asked the main purpose of the text. And before we get to the answer choices, let's just talk about, what's challenging just about the reading. Like, what do you notice in this reading that you thought was maybe difficult for students?
Absolutely. So I think the first most challenging part of this is that you're kind of reading two different things. So the first part that you're starting with is the question. And so you have to read and digest that. And then you're moving on to this body of text that's like, it's a short story. It's kind of not technically an SAT question. And so sort of shifting your focus into understanding the text as a short story versus the question as a prompt, I think is the first challenge.
Totally. And something else I noticed is that in this first paragraph of the story itself, as I was reading that paragraph, I was getting a little disoriented just thinking about, a few of the phrases like, to say the old man have it for what he called a song, right? That little phrase, like for what he called a song. I think most people who are reading that are going to be a little bit perplexed. Like if you're 17 years old, you probably haven't been doing a bunch of bartering and thinking like, I got it for a song, right? So I thought that was kind of challenging. And then even this sentence right below that, can you read this sentence that starts, the old man looked? Can you read that sentence?
So that one says, the old man looked around his views of the city, his pictures of cats and dogs, his flaming bits of landscape.
Yeah, and so to me, like, obviously with retrospect, it's clear this is talking about like the subject matter of the paintings.
Right.
But I hope I'm not exposing myself as a dolt by saying, as I was reading that, I was like, wait, is the old man like looking out his window? Right. And then it took me till the cats and dogs to start to sort of understand what they were even talking about there. Right. So there's this really disorienting aspect to that question right away. Okay, cool. So there's something I want you to notice. We're asked about the main purpose of the text, okay? And there's a phrase, I really like talking to students about structural language, okay? So what I mean by structural language is that there are phrases that basically serve as like walls or bridges, okay? So like a word like therefore is a bridge, and a word like yet is a wall, right? And every every young man experiences that thing where, some girl says to him, I really like you a lot and I think you're great. And yet, right? So that phrase right there seems key to me, that last paragraph, right? So there's a phrase in business, nothing matters until the word but, right? And I think if you're asking the main purpose of the text, the phrase and yet becomes this clear wall where like basically what comes after is probably way more important than what comes first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's go through these answer choices. And something I always talk to students about is crossing answers off. Like it is way more productive to worry about eliminating answers than sifting through these to find something that's perfect. Right. So is there anything that you notice off the bat? I'll read the answer choices. Basically, what I want to do is if you think there's something reasonable about the answer, let's keep it. And if you think there's something that's like a critical flaw, let's talk about it. Okay. So answer choice A says, to reveal the shop owner's conflicted feelings about the new picture. So what do you think? Is there something, do you want to hold on to that or do you want to get rid of it?
I would hold on to this one. I think the signal to me in this answer is the phrase conflicted because that's consistent with the and yet wall that we just talked about. So I want to hold on to it. Knowing that it says conflicted, I'll keep it in like my pocket. But because it's the first one, I don't want to assess too much because what is he conflicted about? What's on either side of that wall? So as long as we keep that, then we can just move on and then eliminate answers.
Spoken like someone who did well on the outside. Okay, so the second answer choice, to convey the shop owner's resentment of the person he got the new picture from. What do you think about that?
So this one, I think if you're reading it quickly, it's easy to say like, okay, yes, this makes sense because of that phrase resentment that correlates with doesn't belong here. He fumed. So it's kind of talking about the shop owner's emotions. What signaled to me that this wasn't going to be the correct answer is that it's talking about the person that he got the picture from. And there's no correlation in the reading between how he feels about the picture versus how he feels about the person that he got the painting from.
So a subtle fact. Really good, Mia. So something that I noticed above and beyond that, like you're right. And by the way, before I move past that idea, this is a game I call character confusion. I talk to people about this all the time that like if you're given a short story in like 10 lines, it's really easy to get confused about who's who. And the test makers are expert in creating, there'll be somebody named John and somebody named June, right? Or in this case, there's just two dudes, right? There's an old man and a young fellow, right? And it's very easy to get confused about who's who in the midst of a timed test, right? So obviously, that means that we should take stock of who's who every time we pick an answer that has to do with sort of narrative fiction. But I want to notice one more thing, which is the and yet. Think about how is this phrase, like which side of the wall is this information on? Even if we take for granted the resentment piece, which is certainly there, even though you're right, the character confusion makes that categorically wrong. But an easier thing is what side of the wall is it on? This
is on the first side of the wall, and it totally just leaves behind everything that comes after the and yet, and so it can't be the main idea.
So when the young man says to his friends say, "What did she say?" and he says, "She said she really likes me a lot and she thinks I'm great," right? Like he's missed the point after the but, right? So okay, so let's switch roles here, and I'll tell you what I think about answer choice C. Okay. So can you read it for me and I'll tell you what I think about it.
So answer choice C says to describe the items that the shop owner most highly prizes.
Yes. So I think this is more clearly wrong because this answer choice, like what pieces might we be saying are the highly prized? Like what items do we even list here?
So that would be like the paintings of the views of the city, pictures of cats, dogs, flaming bits of landscape.
Yes. And he doesn't seem to like these very much, or at least he's posturing as if these aren't, very good. There's one more thing too, which is the word most, right? So how does that language seem maybe flawed to you? What is it about the word most that's a problem?
I think it just has to do with the fact that we don't have any other comparison between what's prized, what's most highly prized. And if we only have, I guess, 4 items that are listed here, then we don't have a sense of how those compare to the other items in the store.
Like extreme answers are almost always wrong. Comparative language, like more would be fine, but most is a red flag. And that's not like high level thinking. There could be an answer that says most, right? But it's a red flag. It's like part of the game for students is just say, all right, like it's going to take a lot for me to pick an answer that says most in it, right? Okay, so read D. I'll tell you what I think.
D says to explain the differences between the new picture and the other pictures in the shop.
Okay, cool. So I'll tell you, I also don't like this one, right? So I think we're going to pick A. And we felt like A was decent, but really feeling more confident about B, C, and D being wrong. This is like a classic situation you're in on the test.
Right.
If you're looking for the best answer, you're not going to find it. If you're looking for, the least bad answer, you will have more success. So to explain is a pretty strong phrase, right? To state something is a much weaker phrase, but to explain something is like a big deal, right? I mean, like maybe we throw that phrase around, but to explain something is to really, really like, detail what's going on. We don't really even know his thinking about these paintings, really. He seems to be posturing, but we don't really know what makes these different, right? But if we were to steel man this or like give it the most charitable read, looking at this other half of the answer, the new picture and the other pictures in the shop, you kind of mentioned this before, but like, what is it about that language that it's at least like resonant with the passage? Is there anything that you see?
Well, there's the new pictures which belong or the old pictures which belong in the store, and the new pictures which evidently don't belong in the store.
Yes.
But I think that's sort of a red herring, because then the first part of the answer goes on explain the differences, and so because we don't have an idea of what those differences are, they're not explained because that's strong language. I don't think it really backs up the new picture, old picture differences.
Totally. Yeah. So we've got the right answer by process of elimination here. A seems great. And, I didn't even really love conflicted at first, right? Like to me, I kind of thought this guy was just doing the thing where he's like, oh, I don't even really like your stuff, but he's just really trying to haggle him down.
Right.
But, as I look more closely, I can see it, right? At the end, he says, he shuffled about pondering the least ridiculous place for the picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, he does seem to think, that it's not maybe as highbrow as some of his other stuff, right? Okay, cool. And maybe the last thing I can point out before we leave this behind, if nobody's too tired of it, is this wall thing again, because I think answer choice D is on the wrong side of the wall, right? Like the don't belong here piece, which is the difference between the new pictures and the other pictures in the shop, is before the wall. So that's a good sign. So just to kind of recap, notice how much of this is like about noticing structural details, breaking things into pieces. If we're just going for it, we're going to get some questions right, but also we're not going to improve our score by just going for it. We need to learn the game of the test, and that's how we win.
Right.
So, cool. All right. So what's the next one you had in mind?
Awesome. So the next question that I had flagged is question 8.
Okay. Cool.
And I can read this one out loud.
Yeah,
so
please.
Question 8 says, the mimosa tree evolved in East Asia, where the beetle, and I shouldn't have volunteered to read this out loud because I'm not going to be able to pronounce.
BT, the beetle species.
Preys on its seeds. In 1785, mimosa trees were introduced to North America, far from any BTs.
Nice.
But evolutionary links between predators and their prey can persist across centuries and continents. Around 2001, BTs were introduced in southeastern North America, near where botanist Xu Mei Chang and colleagues had been monitoring mimosa trees. Within a year, 93% of the trees had been attacked by beetles.
Good job. All right, so I'll read the question. It says, which choice best describes the function of the third sentence in the overall structure of the test? So the first thing I want to notice here is the word function. Okay, so obviously function is different than what is the meaning of this part of the text, right?
Right.
I oftentimes talk to people about roofs. So I'm going to ask you, what is the purpose of a roof? Any good old answer will do, so give it to me.
Protect you from the rain.
Yeah, notice how there's a U and there's the rain, right? There's a below and above, right? And that's the fundamental thing about purpose function questions is if you focus on the roof itself, on the underlying piece, you're going to miss the rain and the person, right? If you started answering me like, well, the purpose of a roof is that shingles and wood, maybe you could finish it out with some real purpose, but like shingles and wood have nothing to do, at least directly, with stating the purpose, right? So that's the first thing that we always want to know about function questions is there's going to be some answer that literally mirrors the language underlined, and it's going to be wrong. All right. So I'll read off answer choices. You can tell me what you think about each of these.
Okay.
And same thing, don't feel like you have to pick one. Just tell me what you like or dislike about answers. And if you feel like an answer is definitely wrong, let's get rid of it. If it looks good, we'll hold on.
Okay.
So it states the hypothesis that Chang and colleagues had set out to investigate using mimosa trees in BT.
So I think this one doesn't strike me as very strong off the bat. I'm always hesitant to eliminate the first answer one unless it's really obviously seems completely unrelated to me. But we get into the botanist Chang and her colleagues later on in the passage. And it's separated by like it's in a different time. So the fact that this is purporting that it states the hypothesis doesn't really ring as true to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Although it's possible for a hypothesis to come before mention of these people, I don't see, I mean, if we look, we could find what these people were doing, right? Which it says that they're monitoring mimosa trees, right? And so their work is specific to mimosa trees and not this general claim about evolutionary links.
Right.
Cool. Okay, I'll do answer choice B now. Same thing. Let me X out answer choice A first. Okay, so B, it presents a generalization that is exemplified by the discussion of mimosa trees in BT.
So to your point that you made before, this is a more general statement. It talks about evolutionary links between predators and their prey. So you can connect the idea of like this being a general statement and then predators and prey. Yes. The exemplification, that's something that we can maybe get into later on in the passage. So this is one that I would probably keep in my pocket.
Nice.
And I feel strongly that the generalization part is sound, and then we can move on to other answers.
I love that you're breaking things down. I'm always talking to people. There's this phrase, all minds are capable of great thoughts, but great minds proceed by the smallest of stages. So I'm not trying to flatter you, but I am saying that like by proceeding with, hey, there's part of this that I really like. There's this other part that like I'm going to flag. If it works, it's going to be fine. But if I have to think about this again, here's the part that I want to, pick back up on thinking about.
Right.
Okay, cool. So C, it offers an alternative explanation for the findings of Chang and colleagues.
So I think this answer has the same weakness as A, where we don't really, at this point in the passage, know what the findings are. I would also flag that there's no language that sets up alternative explanations. So in the last question we looked at, there was that wall, and that kind of linked to the feelings of conflict, whereas like there's no like language hinting at any conflict here. So I don't feel strongly about the alternative explanation.
Yeah, and I think here they're playing with the fact that our underlined piece starts with the word but, even though to your point, it doesn't really, that but is not functioning to set up an alternative between explanations, right? So if someone is like surface level reading, let's say they're rushing, they're just like, hey, I'm clever. They're asking about the underlined piece. Let's cut straight to it, right?
Right.
Then they're going to see the word but, and they're going to see alternative explanation. That like prima facie looks pretty good, right? And you're right, it's definitely not the right answer because the relationship between that phrase and Chang and colleagues just doesn't make sense here. Okay, cool. How about D? I suppose I should read it. It provides context that clarifies why the species mentioned spread to new locations.
So I think this one kind of could be strong if you're reading it off the bat because the providing context kind of overlaps with the purpose of generalization. So I think it can provide context, but I don't know if it necessarily, the second part of the answer clarifies why species spread to new locations. It's talking more about persisting versus spreading. Yeah,
this is pretty subtle, the difference between these two answers, right? And so if we can get it down to two answers, then we're able to say, all right, there's certain parts that are up for grabs, right? So if you say presents a generalization, I'm totally cool with that. Provides context, I'm totally cool with that. So the beginning of these answers are perfectly fine, right? And, we don't need to get like super detailed about those phrases, right? This is a generalization. There is context. It's hard for something not to be context, right? So like those are both fine. The key for me is the word why, okay? And sometimes I'll tell folks that it's better to pick a vague answer than a specific answer, right? Like in English class, you could probably tell, I was like the king of like, not reading the book and then waxing poetic on like deeper meaning. I could just go, right? And I get points for that. I got to college and I got totally shredded for doing this, right? They'd be like, no, like where do you see this fact, right?
Right.
And in English class, it's like those details, those specifics get you points, even if they're not perfect.
Right.
But on the SAT, every detail is like a liability.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you add a detail, it's like, you better back that up. And if you don't, it's wrong, right? So it's
Right.
better to pick an answer there's nothing wrong with it than to pick an answer that has some great pieces, but there is something wrong with it, right?
Right.
Okay, so yeah, that why. Do you have a sense of why the word why is wrong?
I just don't think it really goes into, like, it doesn't tell us why the species mentioned. Like, there's
Yes.
so if we read the third sentence again, it says, but evolutionary links between predators and their prey persist across centuries and continents. So if you try to find a why in that, there's no question, or there's
Yeah.
no why. And then furthermore, I guess you can go back and say there's no question that's answering. So
That's great.
it eliminates
That's
the
really
why.
great. Okay, I'm going to introduce a strategy that I love for students, which is mapping.
Right.
Okay, when I came up with this idea, which I'm sure a bunch of people did before me, but like as soon as I came up with it, I was like, boom, I know how to explain what I'm seeing on this test to young people. So the species mentioned, all right, which species? I mean, I guess there's two really. I guess mimosa trees, but like really, what is the species that we mention explicitly? I won't make you say the name. BT, yes, BT. Okay, so if we say, okay, well, I like this answer, you know, it does give this clarification, it gives this context. You might even say, like, this is the manner in which, you know, once the species has spread, it can flourish, right? So there's a lot that's pretty close there. But if we map that phrase and we go, well, the species mentioned is BT, now we can restate this in a way that makes it clearly wrong. Like, we do not know why the beetle spread to new locations, right? I guess it probably spread to that location because it hopped on a boat or something. It didn't spread because it was like, I hear the call of the mimosa tree across the ocean, right? So once you map that phrase, you go, what exact language are they talking about? BT. Well, then it's definitely wrong, right? And so once again, by process of elimination, we feel way better about B than maybe we did at the beginning. Right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All right, sweet. What's the next one?
Awesome. The next one that I have flagged is question 9, and this is a comparative one between two texts. So I can start with the first one.
Yeah, let's decide which. Sometimes it could go either way. You're probably right. It says, how would 2 respond to 1? So yeah, let's get the background of 1 before we get to 2.
Okay, awesome. So text 1 says, conventional wisdom long held that human social systems evolved in stages, beginning with hunter-gatherers forming small bands of members with roughly equal status. The shift to agriculture about 12,000 years ago sparked population growth that led to the emergence of groups with hierarchical structures, associations of clans first, then chiefdoms, and finally bureaucratic states.
So as someone who already has a degree and has been doing some sophisticated reading for a while, this probably isn't very much, but I always tell young people, like, you know, I just said this, you know, proceed by the smallest of stages, right? That's already a decent amount of material. So just give me, like, in fact, I'll do it. We'll switch off. I'm going to give you my rough take on text 1. Then after I read text 2, you can give me your rough take of text 2. Okay. So in text 1, we see this idea of a conventional wisdom about like the way things go. And, you know, a lot of us are familiar with this story. We got hunter-gatherers who are pretty egalitarian. Then we've got farming, agriculture, in which you start to have more of like a high man and a low man kind of thing, more of a hierarchy, right? And then eventually you get to the level of bureaucratic states. And that phrase might freak people out, but basically just nations, right? Countries, places, organizations that are complex, right? Okay, so that's basically what text 1 is saying. And we'll keep this in mind that we're asked, what would Graeber and Wengrow say about this conventional wisdom? So now that we know what the wisdom is, we can kind of take this on. By the way, Graeber's a really interesting guy. He's an anarchist anthropologist.
Oh,
and he actually came up with the phrase, we are the 99%, that led to the Wall Street marches back in the day. So pretty interesting dude. I'll read text 2. In a 2021 book, anthropologist David Graeber and archaeologist David Wengrow maintain that humans have always been socially flexible, alternately forming systems based on hierarchy and collective ones with decentralized leadership. I'm going to pause right here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if I saw a word like but,
Mm-hmm.
right, then maybe I would think that I don't know anything yet.
Right.
But at the very least, they've made like a pretty like strong statement. So
Right.
what is the strong statement that they've made, in your own words so far?
So they're making the statement that word always is really significant. Because like we talked
Yes.
about with the other one, like it takes a lot to get that like strong statement.
Totally.
So humans have always been socially flexible. And then they talk about these two, I guess, social structures. So systems based on hierarchy and collective ones. But they're coming off really strong off the bat saying that this has always been the way that it has been.
Yeah, perfectly said. So let's just see what we can do with that. Now, again,
Mm-hmm.
if I saw a big yet, right, or a big however in the next sentence, then, we might feel like we need to keep reading.
Right.
But let's at least try to get rid of an answer choice or two. So how would Graeber respond to the conventional wisdom? Like basically he would say no.
Right.
Right? He wrote a book called BS Jobs. He would call BS on this point. Okay. So by conceding the importance of hierarchical systems, but asserting that the greater significance of decentralized collective societies.
So this one I think is kind of tricky because both of those two kind of buzzwords that like if you're reading this for the first time, and honestly, like when I'm reading this for the first time, I'm not thinking like, what does a collective society mean? What does hierarchical system means? So you're seeing those buzzwords and you're thinking, okay, this has both of those. I just saw both of those.
Yes.
Above. Maybe this is sort of the same thing. But then if you look a little closer, like conceding the importance. So like when in the first statement does he concede the importance? So he talks about always, and he talks about maintaining, but there's no sort of normative statement on whether or not it's important or unimportant.
Yeah, really, really well said. So I agree. I think that the anarchist, he called himself a radical, and he's making a radical statement. Right. He is not saying something sort of milquetoast like, hey, like that. They've got a point. He is like trying to do away with the old way of viewing things. So I'm going to get rid of that answer choice right away.
Yeah.
Okay. And I really like what you said about like buzzwords, right? Because this is one of the great things that the test makers like to do is take the big flashy word. So when you're feeling like you need to buckle up because you're like, oh my God, like this is what college is going to be like, right? So if you take those huge words and you throw them in answer choices, you can totally get people to just sort of, pick them out of almost fear, right?
100%.
So you read around those words if you have to. And at the very least, students should be saying, I'm not going to pick that answer because of those words. Yeah. I'm going to pick it like in spite of those words, right?
Right.
Okay, I'll read B. By disputing the idea that developments in social structures have followed a linear progression through distinct ages.
So this one rings more true to me.
Mm-hmm.
I like the language that says by disputing. So in the last one, we talked about conceding. The last one included the phrasing conceding, and that sort of just didn't ring true because that's not what he was doing.
Yes.
And so here, disputing seems more strong because, we know that the conventional wisdom is that these hierarchical systems have evolved in stages, and then we know that David Graeber talks about this has always been that way. So once we know that there's those two differences, the disputing seems like a stronger answer.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes if students are totally lost, I'll say take that first phrase. Just don't even worry about the rest of it. Like if this is sounding fancy, is he conceding or is he disputing?
Right.
And he's definitely disputing. So I like B. If we have any problems with it, we'll have to go to the other half of the answer choice.
Right.
I'm not sure if we will, but basically we're flagging that part's beautiful. We'll see what happens next.
Right.
Okay. So C, by acknowledging that hierarchical roles likely weren't a part of social systems before the rise of agriculture.
Right.
What do you think?
So this one, like we talked about earlier, the acknowledging is sort of a more broad term. So you can look ahead and say, okay, gosh, maybe he is acknowledging. Acknowledging can include a lot.
Yes.
It's not as specific as disputing or conceding.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to move past that. And I would move on to the second half of the answer to figure out what is he acknowledging. That second half talks about hierarchical roles weren't a part of social systems before the rise of agriculture. And so that kind of gets straight to what text 1 is telling us, but it's the opposite of what the claim in text 2 is. So we can probably roll that out.
Totally. This is a hard answer choice because like in a certain way, Graeber's trying to break the hierarchy, right? This is we've always been flexible, right? And this answer choice says hierarchy came later, right? So at a certain way, he's, to the extent to which Graeber wants to suggest that the natural state of humanity is not hierarchical, right? Not structured, which is, it definitely rhymes with his idea, right? That this answer choice is somewhat close, but you're absolutely right. That word always is doing so much work for us, right?
Right.
As soon as we think about that word always, we have to say like, no. So before we get rid of this answer, okay, I just want to make sure I feel good about the rest of the reading. So I'm going to read the second half of text 2.
Great.
Right? And then you can tell me if you feel like this supports holding on to B, or if we C, holding on to C, or totally getting rid of it. Okay. The authors point to evidence that as far back as 50,000 years ago, some hunter-gatherers adjusted their social structures seasonally, at times dispersing in small groups, but also assembling into communities that included esteemed individuals. So, does this sound like hierarchy didn't start until agriculture?
No. So,
yes,
yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah,
Short answer, no.
Short answer, let's get rid of that one and we'll keep moving to D. All right, I'll read D. You tell me what you think.
Great.
By challenging the assumption that groupings of hunter-gatherers were among the earliest forms of social structure.
So, like with acknowledging, disputing, conceding, we can look at the language of challenging. That seems like it could be possible.
Totally.
If we like B, then we could probably like D as well, because disputing and challenging are probably pretty similar. So then we'll move on to the second half of the question. The assumption that groupings of hunter-gatherers were among the earliest forms of social structures, I don't think that that text 2 is disputing that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because text 2 is basically saying that the hunter-gatherers are flexible, right, and that different seasons they did different things, right? So I don't think he's saying this is essentially, you're right. It's playing this game with the beginning of the answer choice is super resonant, right? And we all have this experience in all sorts of elements of trying to focus where like the beginning of something, we're locked in. By the end, it's sort of like something, let's finish this up, right? So answer choice D is leveraging that fact about human attention spans where like the beginning of the answer choice sounds good by challenging something technical about, sociology, right? So it's very easy to get lost in the midst of that and say hunter-gatherers, social structure. I like that answer, right? But once again, by process of elimination, we've gotten rid of that answer.
Right.
Awesome. All right. So we've been at it for a little while. I think we'll call it a day there.
Awesome.
But we're going to do a lot more of this as time goes on. Hopefully, we've given some people some ideas of the games you got to play on the test and the kind of things that we're going to be doing in the mastery program throughout the week. So if you want to hang out with Mia, make sure that you come to the mastery program on Mondays through Fridays. Thank you very much. See ya.